President of Leiden A to indicate to the applicant.
You in this room are not much smarter or dumber than people in a post-conflict society. They assume a basic human psychology that we all share, that they all share, namely that if we are confronted with a wrong and a right, we will conclude that it's right. That simply isn't as simple as that. People can ascertain, and then they say, well, people, if confronted by opinions, they just don't care. So if they don't care, how can this deep hatred then be incentivized? If they have no strong emotional feeling to even, well, look into the matter, how then can they, well, carelessly become deep-seated hated persons? It doesn't make sense, this psychological image that they are portraying. I need to go into some other stuff that they brought up, namely that by talking about these people in a one-sided way, these war criminals, that will actually diminish their moral value. It will make sure that we will not do the same again, or that history will not repeat itself, which in the case of war crimes, of course, something that we would applaud. But instead of creating a sort of moral character of these people, we're creating a moral caricature. In the sense that if you only allow people to talk about the psychology of this dictator in a very one-sided way, and about their actions in a one-sided way, that dehumanizes them, that demonizes them, that makes them different than everyone in this room, and also different from all the politicians that we're faced with that are human. That means that the lesson of history will not be learned because we will not see the danger coming, namely that every dictator could be a war criminal. I would really like an explanation for that. So how can we draw lessons from history when we are not faced with the true picture of history? And how are we not bound to repeat it if we are blind in one eye, namely to the fact that these were people, these were human beings that had human characteristics and were a mixed bag of qualities. And well, let's be honest, and within that mixed bag there were some really bad qualities as well, and we would like them to also be out in public discourse. No, sit down. Now, we need to address some other stuff. Namely, we're going to put people on trial because we want to give less attention to the discussion about, war criminals. What will these trials be like? I think they will be pretty high profile if this is such a tense issue. I mean, will they be publicized? Will it be secret courts or some sort of black operations way to take these people out? I mean, in some way you will be generating publicity, and there will have to be a trial where these things are discussed. And are we as the public allowed to check that? I'm not really sure. So if you really want to diminish attention for these characters, then trials might not be the best way. Now we also need to address the false analogy of the swastika in the first half of the proposition. First of all, most of us from Europe, we live in a post-war society where 60 years have passed. We live in a continent where there's consensus about the Holocaust that it was a bad thing, there's consensus about the Nazi Party that it was a bad thing, where there's consensus about World War II that it's very horrible. Now, the point is that in a post-conflict society, we haven't had time, or there is not yet a time where everyone is agreed about that. So what they say is that simply everyone will agree that this is offensive, and therefore it should be prosecuted. Where we say, look, a symbol is always a symbol is something different from a personality. Namely, a symbol doesn't have a prior life, doesn't have actions. It's only there as a pure symbol, whereas a person is not just a pure symbol. So, and they will prosecute it even if there is no intent and no harm to actually hurt other people, because they talked about victims, right? So, people from India, I hope you're here, you could wear a swastika without the intent of, legitimizing the Holocaust. Why don't we prosecute that? Because there's no intent there. They will not test the intent of these historians to reflect history accurately. No, you talked about history, you said something that there were beautiful highways in Germany, you go to jail. Is that a reasonable assessment of history? Please explain.
We said something very simple. This is equal to active incitement because it creates an environment which encourages and induces violence and crime. Very simple.
Well, no. I mean, the point is that hate speech is already illegal if you directly use it. But we don't say that necessarily, and we need to prove that every talk about a dictator in a nuanced way amounts to hate speech. You haven't fulfilled that word. We need to move on to some more interesting constructors. Namely, what do post-war and post-dictatorial dictatorial societies that had to deal with war crimes, war criminals actually looked like. And they used World War I, which is very interesting. They said, look, in World War I, there was this problem, namely that people felt treated badly, the Germans felt treated badly because of the aftermath of World War I. And they never had a nuanced and fair assessment of their part in the war. They never had that. Now, if we follow their logic on proposition, then World War II would have started because the Kaiser had been, well, glorified in the meantime. That was not the case. The Kaiser was, of course, not convicted, but the point is that the symbol for that war was not the cause for the next war. The problem was that the people in the post-conflict area, namely Germany, after the First World War, never felt, well, that their case was treated equally. Namely, that they weren't the only ones responsible for a great slaughter, and so forth. And you are creating exactly the same situation in every post-conflict society. Why? Because there's always a winner and a loser in a conflict. And sometimes there are just two losers. Now, in this case, Ali already mentioned Truman, the president that decided to bomb Japan with nuclear weapons, to bomb civilians. Also, there must be quite a few Allied commanders who decided to bomb Dresden, right? They were never convicted because the winners will not convict their generals. That means that in a post-conflict society, who will be the war criminals? They will be the leaders of the losing party. And therefore, they will be further suppressed from actually getting a fair and nuanced view in history because their leaders were bad, their leaders were demons, they were stupid enough to follow them, whereas the other guys who also had part in the conflict, well, they're just different. Why? Because they won. Is that really justice? Is that really working towards avoiding a new war? Is that really doing justice to the minority that has lost, that needs to not feel resentment, that needs to cooperate with the majority or with the other party that won? We haven't seen any of that. So what I told you is that people in post-war societies are not stupid. There's a few psychologies very twisted. The lessons from history will not be learned on side of proposition. And in post-war and post-dictatorial societies, this is a very dangerous idea because it empowers the government to suppress the losing party. We beg you to oppose.
The speaker for his comments and ask the second speaker from Haifa to close the case to the proposition.